This is premium audio done right, but it's also old now. The MDR-Z1R came out in 2016. That's ancient, that's like vintage in the world of headphones. And so at $1,800 US, does the Sony MDR-Z1R belong in a collection? Or does it belong in landfill? Okay, that might be a bit extreme, but you get the idea.
You know that feeling when you get into a premium car and you get the nice leather seats, you get the nice stitching on the seats as well. Everything just feels better. It feels more premium. It feels more special. That's what the MDR-Z1R reminded me of.
When you open the box of the MDR-Z1R, which admittedly is probably more showy than it needs to be, these sorts of display boxes are probably unnecessary for most of us, but it is a nice experience opening it up for the first time and beholding the MDR-Z1R. What makes them special and what makes me feel like I'm interacting with something a little bit premium or a lot premium even, is that everything about them's beautifully finished. We've got lovely leather finishing on the headband and also on the pads for the cups. The frame of them's titanium. It's super lightweight. It feels really good. Everything moves and clicks in a really premium way. And even the connectors for the actual headphone cables, which are sitting off in a funny way at the edge of their headphone here, even those feel premium when you grab the cable and you screw it on and make it a nice snug connection. You can tell there's been a lot of care and a lot of thought that's gone into the production of these. And even in 2024, 8 years after their release, or 7.5 at least, these are still a premium feeling headphone. And then if we look on the inside, things are still pretty premium there too. We've got a 70mm dynamic driver, which is huge in the world of dynamic drivers. And the driver itself is made out of a magnesium center cone with a surround made of liquid crystal polymer. That just means it's a nice rigid outer edge and a very lightweight and rigid center cone. That should theoretically reduce things like distortion and cone breakup. And all of that combines to make a frequency response from this headphone that goes all the way, according to the specs at least, from 4 Hz to 120 kHz. That's way beyond what we can hear, but theoretically that should help it stay within its comfortable limits throughout the audible range. And there's even some research now that if your gear is able to produce it, that ultrasonics, the sounds that are outside of what we can hear, can actually influence what we then perceive. Not that we hear those sounds, but somehow it does influence the sounds we do hear. That's a whole other topic. We'll talk about that another time. This fancy cup shape here is designed to reduce any internal resonance that a closed-back headphone can create. That should reduce things like boxiness, boominess, any of those unwanted tonal colorations that some closed-backs can have. I think it also looks kind of cool. And then the final things to think about is that the drivability of these is very easy. They're a 64 ohm driver with 100 decibels per milliwatt of sensitivity, and that means you can plug them into anything and they'll play. As a premium headphone, you probably want to feed them with better sources, but they're definitely going to work with anything. But look and feel isn't the only reason to buy a headphone. We buy them to listen to our favorite music, and that's what I wanted to find out. Does the MDR-Z1R make my favorite music sound better? And my first impressions as I put them on was that they sounded okay. Just okay. They didn't blow my mind, and I was pretty happy to go back to my normal headphones again. The isolation was good, not the best I've heard from a closed back. They were just doing an okay job. And so maybe these are just an outdated, once upon a time fantastic headphone. Some people will tell you that the mid-range is boxy and unnatural on these, and I kind of get where they're coming from too. Having said that, it's also a tonality that I adapted to relatively quickly. And that was when the magic happened. The sound from the MDR-Z1R is one that doesn't actually do anything wrong, and in doing so, it does almost everything right. As soon as you adapt to its slight coloration through the mid-range, what you start to hear is a sound that's punchy and smooth. It's articulate and detailed, but nothing's forced at you. Nothing's pushy, nothing's showy. It's not an in-your-face performer trying to prove how clever it is. It's just an experienced veteran that knows exactly what it's doing. Because it's not showy, because it's not trying to push anything at you, it lets every genre and every style of music, every quality of recording, everything you can think of, they all just come at you in a very natural and really pleasing way. The imaging and separation from them is nothing short of fantastic for closed back in my opinion. It's up there with some of the open back headphones I've heard. Not so much in terms of the size of the soundstage, but absolutely in terms of the separation of sounds and the imaging accuracy. Being able to pick out exactly where each sound sits in space, that's easy on the MDR-Z1R. This is one of those exciting closed-back headphones that's going to have you hearing sounds kind of popping out of space from around your head. And so after spending some time with the MDR-Z1R, getting to know it and honestly getting to love it, the next question for me was, is this kind of like driving a vintage car? Spend some time in a vintage car and it's nice, it's beautiful, it's smooth to drive, but that's when you've gotten used to it. What happens then when you get out of that vintage car and you get into a modern, newer sports car? One with maybe higher performance, higher specifications, higher technicalities, new advancements. Picking up the Meze Liric 2 as one of those recently produced modern closed-back headphones, using new technologies, planar magnetic drivers, fancy planar magnetic drivers at that. Putting those on after coming from the MDR-Z1R, I was really interested and a little bit scared to see what I was going to hear. But I shouldn't have been. The Liric 2 actually came across sounding a bit tinny in the upper end, and the vocals got a bit reedy sounding, a little bit overly textured, a little bit thin. The MDR-Z1R had me listening to the vocals like I was in the room with the musician, whereas the Liric 2 had me hearing it more like it was a recording. In comparison, the MDR-Z1R does sound a little tiny bit boxy. As I've already said, every headphone has its coloration, and rapid switching is often going to make whichever one comes second sound a bit funny at first. But in both cases, you can adapt. But in the case of the MDR-Z1R, you adapt faster because you're already closer to a natural sound. The Liric 2 is a more punishing headphones on poorer tracks, and that's not because it's more revealing, it's just because where its emphasis and its coloration lies, they're all the places you're going to have trouble if you're listening to poorer gear and or poorer tracks. And so the MDR-Z1R is not going to punish you, but you'll still know if what you're listening to is not the best quality. And that's not to say that the MDR-Z1R doesn't have some spice in the treble. It's got a peak in the upper end of the treble that is, for some people, going to occasionally bite. But to my ears and with my different setups, it never once caused me any problems. Flipping around and thinking about bass, and the MDR-Z1R arrived to me with an expectation of a bassy headphone. That's what I'd heard, that's what I'd read. And yet when I put them on, I wouldn't say it's overly bassy. It's definitely not linear or lean in the bass, but at the same time, it's not a bass monster headphone. The tuning is very well balanced across the board in my opinion, and going between the Liric 2 and the MDR-Z1R, they actually measure very similarly, but perceive slightly differently. The MDR-Z1R has a fuller sound. I think it's probably got a longer decay in the bass than the Liric 2, and it helps to give a bit of extra sense of body and weight without ever getting boomy or bloated or woolly or flabby or any other word you want to put to it. To me, the MDR-Z1R bass is just about perfect. It's solid, it's punchy, it's quick, but it's not overblown, it's not overdone, and that's largely because it's really well balanced with the mid-range and treble. And then thinking about technicalities like soundstage size, image separation, image placement, I recently said very good things about the Liric 2 when I reviewed it and also compared it with the Dan Clark Audio E3 headphone, and yet I think the MDR-Z1R has just trumped them both. To me, the sense of soundstage size, separation, and placement is comfortably better on the MDR-Z1R. The Liric 2 is no slouch, but the MDR-Z1R takes the win for me and takes it fairly easily. I mean, in short, I needed this headphone years ago. Why didn't you tell me about it? But jokes aside, if you don't need a compact, portable, and supremely isolating headphone like the Liric 2, which by the way is still an excellent closeback, but if you don't need those features, you can save $200 and get what in my opinion is a better closeback headphone. In fact, I'd go so far as saying it's the best closeback headphone that I've tried. This is the first closeback headphone that I think I've ever owned where I consistently want to listen to it. Other closeback headphones I've had, I listen to because I need isolation. This one I listen to because I just enjoy its sound. So if you're like me and you want a headphone like this in your life, there's links down below you can click through and pick up a pair of MDR-Z1R for yourself. For now though, thank you to all the Patreon members that helped to make this video possible, and if you enjoyed this video, I think you might also be interested in this one.